Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala, amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Iban Yusuf. I'm also with CAIR Arizona. I'm the Civil Rights Coordinator. The reason that we're here today, or the presentation we're giving today, is about Islamophobia. So what is Islamophobia? How is it created? Who's pushing it? How is it funded? And what we can do as a community to push back against Islamophobia. And so this presentation, inshallah, we're going to try to cover 3 different points. And the first is, what is Islamophobia and what is the effects of Islamophobia? The second is, what are the groups that are behind pushing Islamophobia? What are their tactics and how are they funded? And the third point, or the third concept, or third topic we're going to cover, inshallah, is how we as a community can push back. And so, for the first topic, the first point is, what is Islamophobia? And so, Oxford Dictionary defines Islamophobia as a hatred or fear of Islam or Muslims, especially as a political force. And so, what we typically see is there's an irrational fear of Islam and of Muslims. And so, there's a narrative that's being pushed that Islam is inherently evil, Islam is dangerous, Muslims are dangerous, Muslims are terrorists, right? And this creates a fear in people. This creates this understanding in people that Muslims should be people that are feared. And so what happens is that when people overseas commit crimes, atrocities, and people are associating this with Islam, even though we know this is not Islam, this is not the teachings of Islam, there's something called guilt by association. And so what happens is that anybody who's Muslim or is perceived to be Muslim is grouped into this group of terrorists or group of extremists, and we're all lumped together. And it doesn't only affect Muslims. It also affects people who are perceived as Muslims. So some typical targets of Islamophobia of these groups are South Asians who might not be Muslim, who are Hindu or Buddhist. Also includes Arabs, who are not all Muslims. Some of them are Christians. Some of them might even be Jewish, and they're being targeted as well as being Muslims for being or looking Muslim. And then Sikhs. Sikhs are some of the biggest targets of Islamophobia because people falsely understand or perceive them to be Muslim. And so we see the attacks even here in Arizona right after 9/11. One of the first hate crime, I believe, after 9/11 was against a Sikh American that was living here in the Phoenix Valley. We also see some of the effects of Islamophobia as the legislative actions and these state bills trying to ban Sharia, which we'll get into in a little bit. And so what are the effects then of Islamophobia? So there's 2 types of ways that Islamophobia affects the community, or the Muslim community. There's the direct effect and there's the indirect effect. So some of the direct effects of Islamophobia are things like employment discrimination, hate crimes. So we mentioned that the Sikh American community is being targeted frequently. So in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, not too long ago, they had that massacre at the Sikh temple. And the guy who did it because he thought that they were Muslims, and he said he wanted to get the Muslims. We also see in Sacramento, just a few months ago, there was a Muslim man that was killed there because somebody saw him walking outside of out of Home Depot with his sister who was wearing a hijab. And so he killed him in the parking lot because he said he hates Muslims. So this is the direct effect of Islamophobia. And so there might be some that say, okay, I understand the direct effects, but I'm personally not being affected. Right? I've never been discriminated against in school, at work. I've never been bullied. People never made fun of me because I'm Muslim. Alhamdulillah for that, but there's also indirect effects that affect all of us. And so some examples of indirect effects of Islamophobia are state legislation or state actions against Muslims as a whole. And so we see some examples in Europe. In Europe, in Switzerland, there was a minaret ban that happened, I believe in 2009 or 2008. So not too long ago, they banned minarets because they were pushing the narrative, or they're pushing the story that when Muslims come, they build mosques as a victory. So to take over society, to take over the country, which we know is not true. Our masajid, our mosques, are a place of worship for us, or our community centers, a place that we educate our children, and so on. And so as a result, they banned the minarets. In France, they banned niqab for all people at anywhere, at any time. You can't wear a niqab, and you also can't wear hijab in state buildings or in public places. So this is a direct result of these people who are pushing the idea that Muslims are inherently dangerous. And then most recently, we're having the issues in the UK, and we see in Poland that there was a halal and kosher ban, and it's pushed mostly because the understanding again that the Sharia, that when we slaughter according to Islamic principles, that this is inherently dangerous. And so in the UK, we see the exact same thing happening currently. There's a controversy in the UK right now over things that they want things that are halal meat, zabiha meat, they want these things to be labeled. So this is an effect of Islamophobia, an example in the UK or in Europe. And so in the United States, a great example of Islamophobia and the effect of Islamophobia, the indirect Islamophobia on all of us as a community, was the anti-Sharia bill movement. And so the movement began around 2010, 2009, and it was pushed by a guy named David Yerushalmi. And this guy, he is, subhanAllah, we see that he's one of the biggest pushers of Islamophobia. And he even advocated for making practicing Islam a felony offense. So anybody who practices Islam, that they should be considered felons and try to criminalize the practice of Islam. And so this guy and his group, they drafted legislation that made the practice of Sharia illegal or unlawful. And they drafted this bill, and they started passing it around the states. And to get support for them, they manufactured this imaginary narrative of creeping Sharia. And so, sure, watching the national media, you heard this term before, creeping Sharia, that these Muslims are coming in and they want to establish their laws here, and they want to trample all over the United States Constitution, and they want to replace it with Sharia. And so they went around and spread this misinformation, and 7 states passed anti-Sharia bills, including here in Arizona. So we have an anti-Sharia bill on the books here in Arizona, which makes it unlawful to practice Islam, technically, right? Because when we make wudu, that's considered part of Sharia, right? And when we slaughter our animals, that's part of Sharia. So technically, here in Arizona, it's illegal to practice Islam. And so this big movement took place, and alhamdulillah, in 2012, there was a legal action in Oklahoma. They also passed a similar bill that we have here in Arizona, and there was a spearheaded effort by CAIR Oklahoma to combat this. And so they took it to the courts, and in 2013, alhamdulillah, there was a federal judge ruled that these bills are unconstitutional because they prevent the free practice of religion. And so they shot it down in Oklahoma, but unfortunately, it's still on the books in other states. And this actually didn't even slow down the movement. Now they just started reforming it a little bit and started hiding the true intent. And we see just as recent in North Carolina, right after the constitutional, the judge ruled that these bills are unconstitutional, we see that North Carolina passed the Sharia bill right after that, anti-Sharia bill right after that. And just recently, just a couple of weeks ago in Florida, they were trying to introduce the same bill, but there's a coordinated attack against the bill by Muslim organizations, by allies of the Muslim organizations that fought against the bill, and it was defeated.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Nikta Hamidi. I'm a board member with the Arizona chapter of the Council of American Islamic Relations. One kind of key message we want to get across today is that often the term Islamophobia is used when a Muslim goes to the grocery store and is treated differently or feels a sense of hatred from an employee or from someone on the streets. But one important key theme is though that does exist and that does have many direct causes, the overall Islamophobia movement is a calculated and strategic plan against the Muslims of America and, as Liwan mentioned, many non-Muslims who are also being affected. We see Muslims, we see Arabs with Muslim-sounding names who are not practicing, we see people who migrated from Islamic countries and belong to another religion or no religion at all. So all of us are facing these effects together, but it's not a person-to-person movement. It is a strategic and it's a nationally organized movement by different groups. And one thing that we're going to share with you all today, and inshallah leave a copy of the masjid, is CAIR put together a report on Islamophobia and the impact it's had in the United States in recent years. What's great about this report is it's really the first concrete research put together with all of the facts, all of the background, and all of the impact of Islamophobia. So rather than us coming here and telling you about personal experiences or cases we've experienced within our community, it's a very collaborative report put together, putting together some of the impacts all over the country. So I do encourage you guys all to take a look at that, find it online as well, and share it with those who may be interested. So as I mentioned, the Islamophobia movement is an organized attack on Islam, and there are many groups that are behind this movement. So the report identifies two main groups that push this anti-Islamic bigotry in the movement, and there's the inner core, which is 37 core groups, and you can take a look at this as well to see each and every single one of them. But those are groups that have fully dedicated themselves, or at least the majority of their mission, to spreading anti-Muslim sentiments in the community. You see often representatives from these groups on the media speaking out as if they're Islamic experts. However, they're the last people to be the experts, to be discussing the faith and the core values that go along with it. And these groups are not by any means, they're not out there to have a positive message to help anyone in America. The sentiment could change over to another new group or minority group that they're not comfortable with the change with. That's part of the reason why that you even see the Southern Poverty Law Center has identified them as hate groups. They are considered hate groups. You see groups doing similar things for other movements, the LGBT movement, towards different other religious sects, towards different communities that have traveled to the United States over time. And groups like this form, and they've always been defined as hate groups. They're not freedom fighters, they're not freedom oriented, they're not liberty oriented, as often they deceivingly name themselves. They are hate groups. And they're very interconnected. They're not sparse groups working individually. They collaborate, they put together different themes, different strategies, different long-term plans to get their anti-Islamic sentiment across. And of course, they consequently require funding, which we're going to discuss in just a minute. So David Horowitz is referred to as the godfather of the Islamophobia movement, and he directly funds many of these core groups. And one thing that not many of us know or realize, I didn't even realize how big of an issue it was until I became involved with CAIR, is that one of the biggest core groups is headquartered here and active here in Arizona. It is the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, headed by Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. And just some background on him is he was raised Muslim. He's been in the States, I believe, for the majority or all of his life, but his organization has almost been a counter to CAIR's mission. And as much as we encourage the community around us to learn about Islam so that they can...
What's the name?
Zuhdi Jasser. And his name's mentioned in this book too. He's very well known. And, like I said, even earlier before joining CAIR, I thought he was just a local threat. It wasn't until I started learning about the issues that I saw his nationwide influence, and he's one of those Islamophobes, as we call them, that's for some reason unfortunately referred to as an expert on Islam. He comes on shows, he poses his opinion, and he does organization and funding. Everything is based here in Scottsdale, Arizona. So he has a lot of data that is not true. He says 90% of American imams are radicalized, and I think all of us here have met probably 9 or 10 imams in their lifetimes, and I wouldn't say that 9 of them would be radicalized. I think most of us have met 0 radicalized imams in our time. And so he does his best to portray the American Muslim as a threat to the U.S. rather as a vital component of the American community. And then additionally, he's received a great deal of funding, and we're going to, like I said, go into funding, but $10,000 from the Daniel Pipes Middle East Forum just a few years ago in 2010. So it is important as Muslims to, number one, understand what to do when you're exposed to a direct threat to Islamophobia, or to Islam, or an Islamophobic experience. If you are out and you're in a business center and an employee discriminates you, don't be the hasty one to do something that's going to get you in trouble. But at the same time, many of us don't look Muslim or act Muslim or have Islamic sounding names, so we might not ever have direct threats, but we should understand these indirect threats as well, because down the line, I do think that it's consequential not only to the Muslim community, but to the broader American community, specifically immigrants and people from minority groups. And so yeah, if you have any questions about any of those specific groups, you can feel free to ask us towards the end of the presentation. But going back to the report that CAIR released, it's reported that there's over $119 million that was spent on the Islamophobia movement. So again, those people who say that, oh, maybe Islam is just a bad religion and that's why it's getting a bad reputation out there. Oh, Muslims are just doing bad things and that's why. Well, a lot of religious groups or minority groups have concentrated acts of terror similar to Islam that have occurred in recent years. So it's not just the actions, but it's the response.
Could you go back 2 slides to the list of the groups?
Yeah, and like I said, they're all actually all listed with a great little tidbit of bio in each group too in here too, so you can learn more. So again, so it's not that these acts of terror are happening and the public is just responding. There's a lot that happens in between those 2 steps, and that of course involves this $119 million of funding just from the 3 years between 2008 and 2011. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of the big picture of what's happening there. We see it's a huge lucrative industry and there's profit involved too. So of course if you call an Islamophobe who is somehow now considered an Islamic expert on Fox News, he's profiting from that, whether he's being paid directly or promoting his book at the end or a report. So there is a business behind it too, which is very unfortunate because there's more than just the interest of politics involved. There's the capital interest, there is the interest of those who just simply have pride or don't want change. So there's a lot of push and pull and a lot of different variables that are forcing this movement to move forward as it has in the recent years.
And as Nikta mentioned, this is a big business. And you can see from the slide here, it's highlighted in the report, that many of these leaders of these Islamophobic groups, they receive big compensation for the bigotry that they're pushing. And so it is a business. And we see that New York Times bestseller list, if you want to get on that list, just write a book denouncing Muslims, denouncing Islam, and you'll get on that list. And so, as Nikta mentioned, because many of these Islamophobic groups, especially the inner core, a lot of them are concentrated in specific states. So about 5 or 6 are in Florida, a few are in New York. But because we have one here in Arizona that's very active, it's important for us to understand the tactics that they use. And so we can better understand how to combat or how to battle Islamophobia. And so one of the tactics that we can typically see is that they push a false narrative that Islam is not a religion. So they try to say, Islam is a cult, it's a political ideology. And this was actually argued in court, Murfreesboro, Tennessee. There was a situation going on over there where the Muslim community of Murfreesboro was trying to build a masjid. And so there was a group that countered, they didn't want a masjid in their town. And so you might have heard about CNN did a documentary on it, it was covered widely in the media. And so their lawyer literally went into court, and his argument was that Islam is not a religion, it's a cult. So it's not protected by the First Amendment. And so we see that this is a typical narrative, and we'll see, if you see these experts on Fox or CNN or wherever you see them, they're typically saying that Islam is a political ideology. Islam is a political ideology. They'll keep repeating this. Number 2 is this push, or they're trying to push this idea that Islam is an extreme religion. Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, who runs the American Islamic Forum for Democracy here in Arizona, was quoted as saying, "I have read the Quran a number of times, and I see no path to moderation." And so, this understanding that Islam, or they're trying to push this narrative that Islam is just inherently extremist, it's inherently dangerous, and it either needs to be reformed just completely, or it has no place in the world or in society anymore. Number 3 is that all Muslims are violent extremists. And we see this, that every time there's an attack that happens somewhere in the world, they get on TV and they start saying, these are true Muslims, these are Muslims that are practicing their religion. Number 4, Muslims have a plot to subject America to Sharia and supplant the Constitution. And so again, they're trying to portray the Muslim community as this nefarious group here who have ulterior motives to just completely destroy American principles. Number 5 is that the Muslim Brotherhood, or Hamas, is the driving force of every single Muslim organization, every mosque in the United States. So whenever we see Muslim organizations come, whether it's CAIR, whether it's ISNA, whether it's ICNA, whether it's MAS, we always see these people on TV saying that these are the Muslim Brotherhood, or these are Hamas, or another word that they like to use is Wahhabi. These are Wahhabi groups. And these are ways to try to discredit Muslim organizations and Muslim politicians even. When Muslim politicians run for office, for example, Keith Ellison from Minnesota, there's this false rumor going around that he's funded by Muslim Brotherhood. And most of these people that are saying this, they don't even know what the Muslim Brotherhood is. It's a political party in Egypt. They're not here in America. It's just this fear tactic. Another way is to minimize, dismiss, or mock assertions against Islamophobia. So when Muslim groups like CAIR or ICNA, whatever these Muslim organizations come up and speak against Islamophobia, there's this pushback against it, saying that this doesn't really exist. Islamophobia doesn't exist. That these people are trying to victimize themselves. And Zuhdi Jasser is known for going on TV and saying this. He says, "I'm a Muslim. I'm not a victim." These groups like CAIR, they're just going out there and trying to make themselves seem like victims.
I'm actually very disappointed. I've heard him speak at a local convention, doctors convention here in Arizona, and a Muslim doctors convention. I'm just shocked that this dude is doing this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that.
And it's well known. Just the other day, he was on, just 2 or 3 days ago, he was on Fox News, arguing that Bismillah, the word Bismillah that we say every single day, is also used as a war cry, because there's a situation where the soldier came back, or was rescued from Afghanistan, and his father was giving a speech at the White House with President Obama. He began by saying Bismillah. And Zuhdi Jasser was on TV saying that he shouldn't have done that. The Taliban have won now. And so these type of, when you're going on national TV and you're saying these things, it's making us look bad as a community, Number 7 is to make Islamophobic language part of the mainstream. So we see that every single person, every Muslim who's politically active, or every Muslim who's outspoken is an Islamist, is a jihadist, and they're using this language and they're trying to make it part of the mainstream. Number 8 is to maintain that America is a Judeo-Christian country only, and that the First Amendment of the Constitution doesn't apply to the Muslim religion. And so we see this again as part of the anti-Sharia bill movement. There's again this underlying notion that this is a Judeo-Christian society. The First Amendment, the founders, they didn't intend this First Amendment to protect Muslims or Islam, which we know is completely false, because in 2013, the federal judge in Oklahoma said completely the opposite. And number 9 is to link anti-Muslim prejudice with anti-Obama rhetoric. And this is a way to appeal to those who are politically opposed to Obama, is to try to make it more mainstream. And so they tried to link, again, these political attacks on Obama, and they tried to include anti-Muslim or anti-Islamic rhetoric with it, and it makes it part of the mainstream dialogue, political dialogue against President Obama. So how can we push back? So we know this information, and there's a lot more. Like Nikta mentioned, we left a copy of this report with the masjid, so feel free to read through it, feel free to look through it. There's some great information in there. But what is this information? The point of this presentation is not to scare us, right? It's not to be fearful or feel like victims, right? It's to empower us so we can push back. So one of the things that we can do is become more politically active. We see in Florida that one of the key Islamophobes, one of the key pushers of Islamophobia was a man named Alan West. And he was actually elected to go to the House of Representatives in Florida. And Alan West is known for saying things like, all Muslims are a threat. The Quran is a political ideology that's akin to Hitler's book, Mein Kampf. So he's saying these things, that he got elected and was sent to Washington, D.C. And so he stayed there for 1 term, and the Muslims in Florida, again with their allies, they campaigned against him. And the Muslims actually became a swing vote, and he spent 1 term, 2 years in Washington, D.C., and then he got kicked out. And so he's not in Congress anymore. So this is what the effect that Muslims can have in the political process if we become active. Number 2 is to be proactive in combating Islamophobia on a local level. So you know, like was mentioned here in Arizona, we have Islamophobic groups that are active. And so when we hear that these speakers are going out and giving a presentation, you know, wherever they're giving a presentation, that we have to stand up and speak out for ourselves, right? To reach out to the organizers of these speeches and let them know that, hey, these people are bigots. The Southern Poverty Law Center classifies them as hate groups. They have no purpose but to spread misinformation and hate against Islam. Look at the effects it's having. People are dying. Our mosques are being vandalized. And you're hosting them. We have to speak up for ourselves, because if we're not speaking up for ourselves, nobody else will. And also, we have to be active in promoting the good of Islam, right? So we have to be, you know, writing op-eds in the newspaper. In Arizona Republic, you'll be surprised if you read through the Arizona Republics and you see some of the editorials in there, some of the op-ed pieces in there. And when Islam is mentioned, a lot of the times it's negative. A lot of times negative stuff about Islam. So when we see these things, we have to be active and, you know, why not write our own op-ed piece and submit it and say, you know, this is not my Islam, this is not the Islam I practice, not the Islam with the Quran, it's not the Islam of the Prophet ﷺ. And we have to be active in that. And number 3 is to support the individuals and organizations that are combating Islamophobia, right? So Nikta and I are here from CAIR, so we're speaking from our perspective as CAIR reps. But again, there's other organizations and other groups as well that are actively combating Islamophobia. And if you look through the report, there's actually a best of list, a best of 2013. And this includes organizations like ICNA that are combating Islamophobia. It also highlights non-Muslim groups that are fighting Islamophobia, some allies. It also highlights politicians that are actively fighting against Islamophobia in Washington, in local, state legislators. So when we see these politicians, it's our duty to go and support them, right? Because they're looking out for our community as well. So we have to be proactive in supporting the organizations and those individuals that combat Islamophobia. So that concludes the presentation. But we wanted to leave some time for you know, questions, if anybody had any questions, and so we can go into that a little bit.
Do you want to look at him?
You guys look like very intelligent young folks. Do you guys write about this kind of stuff in the local papers?
Well, so we have like we do have a CAIR Arizona blog, so we often post things there on our own, and they also can get published by CAIR National on their online blog. And then, like I said, we encourage others to not just the faces of CAIR, but the everyday Muslims who are dealing with these issues. So, you know, we try to do our best to be engaged in the community outside of the Muslims, you know, as well, because that's just as important.
Thank you for doing this. I'm sorry, it's summertime, so our community's all over it.
Yeah, no. I mean, it'll be hopefully shared online.
Thank you for being here, coming out here. Very, very nice of you guys.
Yeah.
And just to add to that, there was a situation at ASU, it was either last year or a little more than a year ago. Somebody wrote in the Arizona State University newspaper something really defamatory against Muslims, against the MSA. And so what happened was a lot of the Muslim students, I was a student at ASU at the time, and so a lot of us came together and so we started writing these op-ed pieces to the state press. And what happened is, just a few of us wrote a few articles into some op-ed pieces, and we saw a whole bunch of other editorials and op-ed pieces coming from non-Muslim students that saying that this is disgusting. I can't believe that people are writing this kind of stuff about Muslims, about Islam. And so we see that, you know, if we just are just even a little bit proactive, I think it was 3 or 4 people that wrote to the state press, and we saw so much op-ed pieces come in that the state press couldn't even print it all. They just had to put them online. So, you know, if we're just a little bit more active in ourselves, we see that the majority of people aren't, these groups that are doing this, they're fringe groups now, right? There's Islamophobia. There used to be an Islamophobia caucus in the House of Representatives, these groups that are just, these representatives that are actively pushing Islamophobia. Most of them are gone now. Most of them got kicked out of office because people saw that they're actually pushing hatred. And so,
as Muslims, I think we don't do a good job of, we're just very reactive. We're not proactive. We're always on the defensive, trying to defend ourselves in our faith.
Yeah.
Which I don't understand why.
And we tried to combat that. That was a really good example of what we did at ASU. And a lot of this is coming straight out out of the students of Arizona, because I think that's the generation that's both associated with their Islamic and their American identity very deeply. And so we also had a few, like I said, proactive events where there were vigils held, and rather than waiting for someone to blame Muslims, we went out and said we condemn this regardless of what we're responsible.
But you know what just happened in Pakistan last week?
Mm-hmm.
That lady who was murdered right outside the court, out of all places, right? At least I haven't heard any major Muslim organization come out and condemn it here in the U.S. In Arizona, I'm speaking for Arizona, obviously. There's not a lot of Muslim. I'm sure CAIR issued a statement on a national basis. But you open CNN.com, for example, right? Or you go to channel 200, depending on what you're watching on TV. All CNN was talking about was that event. Whereas the same exact time, something worse than that happened, or equal, happened in India. But the lobby is so strong. The Hindus are so strong that nobody's saying anything. Oh, look at the Indians, they're doing such a great job of fighting, all this hate. But as Muslims, we do a pretty poor job of coming out condemning things like that.
Yeah, and I think even that can lead to a slippery slope, right? Because as Muslims, we're opposed to any type of violence, right? So in that situation, we're all appalled by it.
Yeah, we know that, but how do non-Muslims find that out? That's the issue, right?
And so I think even that, right? It's like it becomes a slippery slope. So if we continuously condemn everything, then it seems like it's our responsibility. Like we feel guilty about it, And so I understand like certain things that it is our duty to condemn and make sure that they understand that this is Islam. But just like when an African American does something bad, African American groups don't come out and start condemning, Or when
in America, everything is about presentation.
Yeah.
The difference between Macy's and Nordstrom is presentation.
Yeah.
Nordstrom will charge you for the same exact thing, twice or 3 times as much. The same exact thing. It's all about presentation.
Yeah.
Look at what happened yesterday. Where was it? Seattle or the university shooting, wherever it happened. Last couple of days, right? Nobody's come out and said, these guys are terrorists. They're just crazy in the head. There's some crazy white guy or Asian guy or Mexican guy, Hispanic, who was crazy. But had I done that, God forbid, or you had done that, imagine what the reaction would have been.
Yeah, and that's the situation. Even in Fort Hood, the second Fort Hood shooting not too long ago. Before the identity of the shooter was revealed, if you turn on TV, it was saying, is this another attack, a terrorist attack? And then once they found out the identity, it just changed. The terrorist talk just stopped, and it became somebody who's mentally ill or somebody.
I think our next 2 or 3 generations, we've got to go all out.
And I'll also add, at least on behalf of CAIR, is that they are very consistent and very reliable on condemning acts that occur within the nation. And that's all acts of terror. And you can go online and see they've been both these chapters within the states and CAIR National as well. But like you said, you go into a fine line where something's happening in Pakistan and we're talking here about, so-and-so did this in Lahore and we condemn them. Well, why do you condemn them? Are you affiliated with them? Is there a reason why? So
it's on national media. It's just...
yeah, I know. So you see so many of these things going on. And again, that goes back to the Islamophobia movement, that maybe some of these stories wouldn't be getting as much coverage had it been, like you said, occurring in India at the same exact time. So we try to do what we can, and then of course, more than just condemning, it's if you go out and you speak, we try to speak to non-Muslim groups about things like Islamophobia and working together with other religious groups as well. And the biggest difference that I've noticed is if you meet in the majority of America, you meet non-Muslims who've never met a Muslim or don't know that they've met a Muslim. And I remember in CAIR, one of our trainings, we learned statistics on it, and it was much higher than what you would think, where people believe that they've never met a Muslim before. So if you can actively play that role of the normal Muslim in someone's life, then it does sort of sensitize them or desensitize them from whatever they might see on Fox News or stuff like that.
I have a question. What's the next what's CAIR's next proactive event, proactive thing that you guys are talking about, and what help do you need from the Muslim community?
Well, so, one of the things that we always do, right, is so, for example, we talked about Islamophobic speakers come. One of the things that CAIR usually does is we put out action alerts. And so if you go on the website, if you subscribe to the email list, what we do is we send out action alerts and we say, email this person, let them know that, this isn't right or this isn't welcome. And so we periodically do those. So when you see those CAIR action alerts, just do it. You know, it's easy. A lot of times a message is written out for you, and all you have to do is just send a letter, or somebody you need to call, a politician, then call the congressperson's office. So we typically do stuff like that, as well as we just do it on a day-to-day basis. Like I said, one of our main services to the community is fighting against discrimination on a personal level. So when a sister is discriminated against at work because of hijab, then they can report it to us, and we'll get them attorneys, and we'll get them legal advice, and we'll try to combat it on that level as well. So again, CAIR is just an outgrowth of the community, right? This is funded by the community. We're completely integrated into the community. We are just a natural outgrowth of the community. So we are a resource. And so what we need from the community is just ongoing support from the community. When incidents are happening, report it to us, so we can act on it. If we hear about, maybe an Islamophobic speaker somewhere, let us know so we can do something about it. And just continue to support the organization.
And additionally, right now we're sitting in a masjid talking about Islam with other Muslims, but spread our message around too. A lot of people don't understand that we are available as a resource. And like we said, not exclusively to Muslims, but anyone who feels like they're a victim of any of the things we fight against in our mission. And the more awareness you raise, the more you speak to people. People think that Islamophobia, like we mentioned, is just if you directly deal with it, that's fine. But if you're lucky enough to have blonde hair and blue eyes, it doesn't matter. So talk to people about these issues, let them know what's going on, and then they can implement our core values in their day-to-day. Like we plan to release a voting guide, for example, which are a list of recommendations of representatives in our state and how you can apply Islamophobia and their views to the decisions you make. So just be vocal about it. You don't have to be the one condemning acts of terror, but do know that as a result of those acts of terror, if you're ever treated poorly, you don't have to sit there and just complain about it to your friends. So you do have a resource here locally in the community. And we've developed relationships with people with masjids all over the East Valley, so we're really excited that we're finally expanding out here as well. So do share what you've learned.
I think it's getting close to time for Salah, so we should start wrapping up.
Shake's getting nervous.
But what we can do, inshallah, is after Salah we can talk offline if you have anything else.
Thank you so much for coming, you guys.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Jazakumullah khair.